What up, everybody? How you doing today on this Memorial Day? I hope you're doing pretty well. I am myself too. But before I get started, let me just say, since it is Memorial Day, give a big shout out to all the fallen veterans, those who are serving in the military to pretty much protect our way of life, our freedoms, and everything. Because let's face it, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now, and coincidentally, anyone else who, likes to do what they do. I mean, this is just how it is. I mean, so give respect to anyone who serves on the military front and those who are really trying to make a difference in our world. But with that being said, welcome to Jedi Granville Productions. I am your senior sexual chocolate, Jedi Granville. So I hope you're enjoying yourself. Oh, and if you do hear some thunder or some rain right now, that's only because we're getting a lot of rain here in Louisiana in the Pelican State. So hey, I guess that happens sometimes. But this is a special type of what I call my so-called segment of on Jedi Granville Productions, personal junk of favorites. And what we're going to be discussing is the 50th anniversary of my favorite special effects, well, I must say special effects or visual effects studio, ILM, which is known as Industrial Light and Magic, full name. It turns 50 years to this day. I mean, hold up here. Yes, 50 years. Can you believe it? It all started in 1975, and here it is 50 years later, back in 2025. And who would ever imagine that a studio like this would come to be, so, you know, transcend into what it becomes now, this juggernaut of, amazing visuals and whatnot and all that stuff. I mean, it's incredible. It's amazing how certain things, you start out with this little seed and it grows to this giant tree that just blossoms into a redwood, and just lasts for so long. I mean, it's just like it's stays young for whatever. But why is it that this studio, like so many things in life, has stood the test of time? It stood the test of time from the 70s through the 80s, 90s, and so on and so on. Well, I mean, let's just face it. I mean, the work that they've done is amazing, but to really get the you know kind of groundiness of where this thing even started, let's go back in time to the 70s. Let's go back, as the saying goes, a long time ago in the mind of a young director, long time ago, far away. Something like that. Well, given that the fact that certain things going on back in the 70s, I grew up in the 70s and I wasn't really here to a lot of the things that were going on back then, which would distinct my age. Besides that, the simple fact is that during this time a lot of things were going on. Say for instance, the end of the Vietnam War, that was coming to be, the end of this. In fact, it ended when around 75, there was that Watergate incident, something scandalous like that was going on. Different things were happening, like the gas wars, gas shortages, somewhat, and all that. You know, the 70s showed a lot of dire things that were going on during this time. And it's amazing how, but to tell you the truth, it's amazing how we even got out of that hitch back then, even though now there's a lot of drama going on. But back then it was such a chaotic mode. And, things were going on in cinema had been affected by this just as well. I mean, David Khaled, famous, you know, Takasasu, kaiju enthusiast, he even said on a commentary of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, the lucrative marketing of certain aspects, such as James Bond, to a degree, even Godzilla. They were kind of drying up. Something Batman, all these things were just coming to just not being as much as they were. And the thing about that is that you know people were just living in this kind of shell of just being just not so great, not feeling great, not feeling good. I guess because of so many things that were going on during this time. And Hollywood was just kind of the same thing. I mean, they were just making movies that were not positive in terms of giving something to look forward to. I mean, given that it was, science fiction specifically was not a very lucrative aspect in the films. I mean, you look at some of the films back then, such as Soylent Green or even Logan's Run. They were not. They weren't generally giving you a positive aspect of the future or just in science fiction in general. They're more dystopian types of films, and it didn't seem like, okay, we're not really getting no joyous mode here. Well, given that that is the case, enter a young director. We'll call him George. It's yes, and this man George, or full name George Lucas, was a young, inspiring director. He had hopes and aspirations of a positive outlook of things. And even and I should say too, even Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry was given a positive look on excuse me, given a positive look on the future. But where Gene Roddenberry had kind of given an idea, George Lucas would kind of pretty much escalate it to so-called light speed in that general sense. So, how does him manifest something that would or would contribute to something so just outland? I mean, I'll finish anything else that's going on. Well, he had this little idea that was called Star Wars. Okay, now just think about this. Star Wars. What is this? I mean, this is doesn't sound. I mean, it sounds pretty good. Star Wars, but you have wars in there, so why would that even be a thing? Why would that even be a combination of something that would contribute to, something positive to a degree? Well, the thing about this is, as I mentioned before, a lot of things, especially in Hollywood, were not being, or they were being closed up. They were being pretty much, just allocated and not being used anymore. It's true that you had special effects being done, but they were kind of like in intricate modes. And the thing about it is, most of the studios were pretty much cut and dry, being done, being thrown away. They weren't even being, tallied up to be something worthy of being used. I mean, things like model photography, matte paintings, certain, they were still being used, but not at the level that George Lucas wanted for his film. And the film that he was, the effects that he was trying to do were going to be massive and more extravagant, and no studio was available to do this. I mean, he went to, which Fox had a special effects studio, but that was pretty much being disbanded. So it's just Universal, Warner Brothers, Columbia, all these outlets were pretty much, not more. They were just pretty much being this desolate. They were in deserts, basically. That's what they were. Well, Lucas had a brilliant idea in which he thought, well, if there's no particular special effects around, why don't I just create one? Why don't I just manifest one into existence and hire some brilliant brains who have incredible talent to bring to life what I want to bring to the screen in telling my story of this elaborate space arena, a space opera, as the saying goes. That's what That's what Star Wars eventually was, space opera. And the first person he came in mind was Doug Trumbull, who was a specialist on or special effects supervisor on Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. And Doug Trumbull was a very intricate part of a lot of the special effects during that time. He did Silent Running. He did a couple of things at that time in the late 60s, early 70s. But still, Doug, he wasn't too fascinated with doing that. And I mean, he still had a hand in doing special effects, but I think he wasn't exactly forthcoming. So he suggested someone else to him, which was John Dykstra, a very young and very tall, 6'4" individual who was ambitious, who worked with Trumbull on Silent Running. And he said to himself, well, you're going to be my forerunner on this, and hopefully maybe you can contribute to being the one to gather up some amazing people that will bring to light what I really want for my for this particular company that I'm trying to mass produce, because I wanted to bring to light the spectacle that is the film that is. Even George Lucas said, the story is not the special effect. The special effect is the story, because you want the special effect to enhance the story. And that's what he was doing here. So that being said, John Dykstra would hire some people or get in touch with some people who were pretty much, definitely going to bring to light something that would really hone in their skill set and pretty much would do what George Lucas really wanted. And the amazing thing about the people that he got in touch with and gathered up, here's the crazy thing. Some of them, and I kid you not, some of them were like straight out of college, but some of them were straight out of high school also. Some of them weren't even, like I say, I mean, fresh. They were fresh out of out of not college, but high school. Some of this just shows how talented some of these people were, but they weren't given a chance to, show their skill set. And many of these people, and I have a picture, because this is an old picture here. Give you an idea. This is a picture of a meeting of some of the people who would work on the original Star Wars. And I have to tell you, you look at this picture, you can tell that they weren't exactly this, the sophistication or whatever you want to call of the special effects of the day of the Hollywood, of the golden age, where, those individuals, they wore suits, they wore the khakis, they pretty much were more, casual. I mean, remember when I say casual, more formal in what their design was. Here you can see these pictures. You can see these people are literally in tennis shoes, blue jeans, just everyday individuals, nothing amazing, nothing out of the way or whatever. And it's funny how these individuals were, they're brought to light something that would say they would give them their chance to shine on the world. And some of these people you can see in the foreground here. This is sitting in his couch here. That's Dennis Muren. He was one of the many people who worked at ILM that is kind of in retirement now, but he was one of the forerunners who brought a lot of technique and technology to innovate what ILM is today. And sitting next to him is Mr. Ken Ralston, who doesn't work at ILM anymore, but was a forerunner in the technique of what the effects that he was bringing to light. So This is just an example of how you get people who have a talent, and hopefully these individuals who have this talent will breathe life into what you want. You want them to breathe life into just the spectacle that you want. But then again, sometimes you never know what's going to bring, because let's be honest, some people say that we know exactly what we're doing, we know exactly what we're going to bring to light, we know we're going to. It's like you have no freaking idea what you're going to bring. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. You have no idea. You don't know. These people didn't know. They had no clue. Even Lucas, even though he was a positive, individual who wanted to bring these things into playing and into being, but that doesn't mean that whatever you do is going to be 100%. But they were ambitious, they were tenacious, they had the drive, they had the fever, they had the mobility to say, let's see what we can do here. So through trial and error and a little bit of elbow grease, the name of Industrial Light and Magic is kind of a, pairing of what it is, because the industry, the name industrial pretty much breaks it down. It's an industry. It's a, it's a fact. It's pretty much a factory made thing, which is what ILM is. And the magic, I mean, when I say the light is like lighting up a person's idea of what some things come to light as far as an idea is. See, the light bulb here, we got an idea, we're going to make this happen. And the magic, if you see the old logo of the ILM logo, you see a magician holding a lamp, I mean, a light bulb in his hand, which shows like we are the magicians who are creating illusions, and we're going to make this so brilliant, bring it to light and everything, and that's what it's all about. It's supposed to bring something that you've never seen on screen or even on television, and see how you be affected by it. So with that being said, this group here, which I showed again, real quick. Uh, no, that's not the right one. Hold up. I told you, man. I'm still working out the kinks here. Here, get myself back on here. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, these individuals gathered up and moved to a small, or let's say, somewhat large type of warehouse in Van Nuys, California, which was the starting point of ILM. It was the ground. It was the ground. It was the official mark stamp where it would eventually make its name, but also it would not be its final resting place. Because in terms of resting place, we find out that later on in life, ILM was spread from not just from to you know George Lucas's ranch, but also to Presidio in San Francisco and other vendors throughout the world. We're in London, Vancouver, and even I don't think Singapore anymore. It used to be Singapore, but some in India also. So the studio has spread viciously through its time. But they started in this little place in California in Van Nuys, and they went to ground running. They spread. They got the work done. They went ham on producing the effects for George Lucas's film Star Wars, and they were doing pretty well, but the thing about this is, as I mentioned before, even though these people had not had a single credit to their name, you know, they were still inexperienced. They were still not really what they hadn't honed in their skills yet. This is it's just almost kind of a sense of what E.G. Subaraya did when he did the first Gojira. He hired some people. He was already doing special effects for films. He was already doing that, but that film, it was the first time we encountered doing special effects that involved suitmation. You know, you got to hire people like Haruo Nakajima, to perform the suit. And see, that was something right there. They had no idea. Some people were still inexperienced. And they didn't know exactly what they were doing. I mean, they were still learning. I mean, even though they had the skill set to do the things, they still didn't have the all of experience to do this. I mean, yeah, give me a chance, but we don't know how it's going to go. So, but with that being said, it the film was supposed to have a release date of like in the summer of '76, but unfortunately, some of the effects that George Lucas saw were not. It's like, no, this is not what I really want. So they had to start from scratch, and this is the first time, as I've heard, that a film would take 2 years to be made. I was kind of feeling like, why take that long to make a film? Well, because certain techniques, certain things, were still raw and they were still learning. And one of the skills that they learned was how to do, motion control, which is, create the motion of emotion for a model that they build and everything. But as I said before, they still had no know-how what they were going to do. They didn't know what they were really doing and what they were projecting. They have no clue. They're still learning. But the film was supposed to be released in the summer of '76. But since they didn't have all what they had, they said, well, let's push it towards 70 the winter of '76, which is December, around Christmas. Still wasn't ready. So they decided to make a special trailer, which pretty much would get people's juices flowing to see, well, we're going to do this. And if anyone's ever seen this trailer, then it's this is, like I say, this is the 70s kind of trailers where it's very scratchy, very rough, it's and it's not sad, it's just ambitious. And I'm glad that they did it, because it shows that, okay, we may not get it done like this, but at least we will get it done. We will do it. So since it wasn't going to be released until '70s, it was got to be pushed again to the summer of '77, which coincidentally, yesterday was the 48th anniversary of Star Wars. I keep saying Star Wars because that's how it was originally titled as, not New Hope, Star Wars. So moving on from that, we realized that they finally started getting their gain. They started gaining momentum. They started getting to say, okay, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to have. This is what we need to contribute to. This is what we need to make happen. So with that, they finally said that, okay, we get this going. We get this going. We got that going. We got this going. We got this having it this way, So in time, they would, get it all going, and everything was working out pretty well. But they still didn't know what they made would actually show up and actually be, worth watching. They didn't know. They have no idea. I mean, anyone can write a book, anyone can make a film, anyone can make a song, anything like that. But you have no true aspect of what the final outcome is going to be and how it's going to be received by someone. So, come May the 25th, 1977, all their doubts, all their woes, all their blood, sweat, and tears, all the work that they put in to making this film, as effect wise, would be put to rest. Because, as we all know, the glory of that theme when it burst out with the title "A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away," and then boom, Star Wars comes on the screen, and it's like, and then the opening shot where first we see a space, the stars, then it pans down to this planetoid in the distance and a planetoid underneath us, and then we see this small ship, racing across, and then we see the Death Star, not Death Star, I'm about to say that Star Destroyer come across. And let me just say, when I saw this in the theater with my immediate family, minus my father, because we won't go into the details of that, all my family members went to go see this film. And let's just say, when you see that Star Destroyer go overhead, just go overhead and just can seem like it's almost continuous. Put yourself in a 70-year-old shoes and just imagine how that affects you. Just seeing that, just like, wow, that's amazing. You know what I mean? But then again, I was 7 years old, so I mean, you can imagine when you're 7 years old and you're seeing something like that, it's going to affect you a lot. So that being said, when you see the film, you see these great characters, you see the action, you see all this. I mean, you see this, you just see all these amazing effects, but you see the incredible stories being told. And then, come push the shove, when you see the end of the film where the Death Star gets blown to bits, you're just like, wow, what did I watch? Of course, you're a kid, you don't know any better, you don't really understand, but you know that if you're an individual like myself who has an incredible, amazing imagination, yeah, you really don't really care about those things. You really don't think about that. You just realize that you had an amazing, joyful journey, and that's what Star Wars did. But it was given that by which was ILM. The team at ILM brought to life what George Lucas had been wanting to do and what he wanted to give to the world. And somehow, some way, this re-energized so many people's aspects on, the future, and how it just made you realize, like, maybe there's something. And of course, studio looks at it this way. They look at it as, oh, well, we're going to make some money off this. We're going to do some things. Yes, but that's not what George Lucas's idea of, making films was. He wanted to bring people to the studio, to the theaters, to enjoy themselves, to escape reality. And during this time, the reality of the 70s was sucking really hard. This was a pure escapism for them, and it truly gave them the sense of, like, okay, we can have 2 hours of incredible, you know, just fandom of fun, and not have to be weighed down with what's going on in the world. And somehow, with ILM's help, it did that. And this is what happened with this particular film, and this is what happened with this particular studio. And forever change, they would make everything what it is now. So, Star Wars laid the ground running. It made history, made a ton of money. And so it'd be, studios, they decided to say, well, since we got that, let's do another one. Let's do something else. And you got to remember, at this time, ILM was only strictly doing projects by, you know, George Lucas. That was it. It was only doing that. But in time, that would change. And eventually, they would go ahead and do, you know, Empire Strikes Back. And right here is a moment where this was a shot from Empire Strikes Back, where you see here Mr. Visual Effects Supervisor Ken Ralston standing at the miniature version of the space worm mouth, taking a clip to show where it's saying you see the date on there. It's early February, February the 1st of 1980, because the film was supposed to come out a few months later in May of 1980. But there we go. Still learning. But you see that back then they were doing things like that, and they started with that. And also, I should add this here, which is like I say, these is just one of the many things that was going on back then. I mean, this we realized that the studio was doing the job that it was doing, which was, I mean, like Industrial Light and Magic. They were contributing to making effects primarily for Lucasfilm. They weren't doing it anything for anything else, nobody else. And Lucas was okay with that. He didn't have to worry about it because, like I say, it's his company. It was being done almost like Super Raya's productions when Ultraman was coming to play on television, and it was primarily doing that for you know for him. And his studio was doing only effects for that, for that show. So he was making money, but also George Lucas was. But it wasn't about making money. It was all about having the tools to do the story. Well, eventually, his company would spread out to different artists, and thankfully, it did happen that way, because if it had just been one-sided, just with one person, then ILM would never been able to stretch its legs. It wouldn't been able to expand on what it would become, because in time it would go on to help other artists like Steven Spielberg, someone who is a very feverish, you know, idealistic filmmaker. And his first project that he worked on that had ILM do effects on was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And we all know how that went down. That movie pretty much got us the introduction of Indiana Jones, and how many people would know that the Ark of the Covenant is not to be opened. That's how it is. But also during that time, not just Spielberg, but other artists like Matthew Robbins, who did Dragon Slayer, which gave us the introduction of a technique called go motion, which was pretty much like stop motion, but not. Go motion pretty much means you're going motion while the film camera is open. Where you do stop motion, you take a picture, move the figure, stop it, take a frame, stop it, take a frame. Whereas go motion, you have the fluidity of just moving the camera as you're moving the moving the object that is. I mean, it's slower, but you see the item. And if you watch Dragon Slayer, you realize that the emotions of the dragon in that film was so realistic. I mean, when I saw this, I was like, is that a real dragon? Is that a real, technique? I mean, that's when I say real, I mean, that's how real dragon, that's really doing it. It wasn't. It was just a model of a dragon, and so forth and so on. So, but it shows that ILM's techniques or technicians were growing. And I should mention this too. At the time when Star Wars was being made, the amount of people that were on that picture who were in working in ILM, it was only a handful of people. It was roughly like 80 people. That's all. That's all they had is 80 people. Where the cameraman, the gaffers, pyrotechnicians, model makers. It was just 80 something, maybe less. And around this time, it had grown to over 100. So it was growing. ILM was growing. It was just taking time, but people were coming out of the woodwork to come work for this company, and eventually they would, you know, get more traction. I mean, ILM will get more traction because you got more talented people grounding traction. And right here, wait a minute, what's going on here? Okay, I don't know why that's happened like that. No, this is so there we go. Yes. This is another project that was done by ILM, which was ET, which was pretty much, if you know, ET phone home moment. And behind this armature of miniature of one of the kids on the bikes, if you notice that moment where the ET has the kids fly in the air by him, that's behind the scenes look of it, where it's connected up to armatures and everything, filmed in front of a blue screen. And the guy behind this miniature is Michael McAllister, who is a very well-known cameraman, but may not know him because he doesn't do much work anymore. But like I say, worked on ET, and that's the thing about these films, that eventually they were grounded, they were gaining speed doing other projects. I mean, they would eventually work on the first or second not Star Wars, but second Star Trek film, The Wrath of Khan, which is probably coincidentally probably one of the best in the Star Trek or original cast Star Trek, films, The Wrath of Khan. And like I say, it was spreading their wings, it was spreading their wings. And during this time, another film that Spielberg had produced and written that had ILM do effects on was Poltergeist, which, if anyone's watched that film, the imploding house, for the longest time, I didn't know how that was done. But when you find out what it was, how it was executed, you're like, wow, dude. I mean, that is brains to brains. Amazing how they did that, you know. And I was just kind of like, damn, dude. I'm like, I would imagine that the stuff that they were doing, it was so incredible. And like I say, pushing on, they kept doing amazing stuff, and stuff like this. Back then. But as I say, they were starting to gain momentum and everything. And this was just 84. And 84, this is the crazy thing. They were starting to do more, but they only did like two films. Well, actually, four films. They did in The Temple of Doom. They did the third Star Trek film, The Search of Spock. They also did John Carpenter's Starman, which I have to say is like one of the most brilliant films that to come out of the gate of terms of what they did back then. And then there was a spin-off film called what was it called? What was it called? Um, trying to remember. Trying to remember. Oh yes, the Ewok Adventure. That's what I'm trying to think. What was this film? The Ewok Adventure. That's what it was. Came out in the winter of '84, and it was a spinoff of the Star Wars franchise, which George Lucas was trying to create and make more of. But like I say, at this time, um, you know, it's everything was spinning, everything was working, and people see how much ILM was doing and how it was, affecting everything, and seeing that their effects were really gaining some momentum here. It's like, who are these guys? It's like we really want to get them and see if we can get them to do our effects. And as I mentioned before, they've already did effects for two of the Star Trek films. Well, this one right here is pull it up. This right here is the effects being done for my favorite Star Trek film, The Voyage Home, which involves the whales, the humpback whales, trying to get them back to take them from the past to the future, and I just love it because I love whales. Whales are my favorite animal on this planet, and B, because it's just something simplistic about the effects. I mean, this was water tank things done in here, and like I say, it was a lot of things that were being used in there. They were doing motion control, matte paintings, but I think this is the first time they were doing underwater sequences for films in their the studios. And the people who the whales that were designed by this individual named Walt Conte, and he was the one who designed it. And coincidentally, he would go on to do more stuff for future films. Not without ILM, he started his own company like Anaconda or Free Willy, and it just shows like how people can start in a certain place and move on and create their own studios and got that momentum going. So it shows that how ILM had their own way of pretty much giving the gravitas for people to start up their own stuff and move on. I mean, it's not with saying that a lot of the stuff that was being done was pushing them to innovate and contribute to more good effects. And I have to say, this is at a time too where computer graphics was a thing. Computer graphics was a thing where it was still in its infancy, but it was getting momentum, where it started with Star Trek 2, where you see the Genesis effect, and it does this, showing how the Genesis probe would turn a simple moon into a vibrant, living, Earth-like environment. Well, their next step when visual effects in terms of computer graphics was the stained glass soldier moment in Young Sherlock Holmes. And I gotta say, when you see this moment, you think like this is automatically, and this was a new technique. You think this is gonna, grab, you know, people's attention in terms of this gonna, really get momentum, but it lost to another ILM co-produced film, which was Cocoon. So at this time, this is just showing how certain films, certain aspects of certain things were not, going to go lightly in terms of some things will win, some will lose. And, but it shows that ILM kept producing, kept doing things, and kept doing what they had to do. So years go by, they're making money. When I say, well, yeah, making money, they hit certain pot roles in life. I mean, it's like anything. I mean, they did Howard the Duck, so I mean, you go figure that one out. But and I like Howard the Duck, so to speak. But no, the thing about it is everything's going to have a hit and miss. Everything's going to have a pretty much a thing that's going to happen. But as time progressed, everything was going on. As I mentioned before, the computer graphics of the time were still kind of, you know, chunky, but they were gaining momentum. And some of the things that ILM produced using computer graphics was like in films like Willow, um, The Abyss with the pseudopod, water pseudopod sequence, and various other films, you know. And eventually we would get out of the 80s and step into the 90s. And what we can be said is that one of the people who would really contribute to most with ILM, because as I mentioned before, The Abyss, was James Cameron. And he was the one who had them do the pseudopod in The Abyss. Well, he decided to get them to do something with which was Dennis Mirren, because I mentioned before he was one of the forerunners for new techniques. He would get them to create the amazing effects of the T-1000. And as anyone know, if you watch, especially that one sequence where Homeboy comes out of the fire and walks towards camera, that is an effective moment that capitalized that everything that ILM has been doing up until that point were changing. So you feel like, okay, is it going to leave other techniques in the dust, like this one right here from The Rocketeer, where a sequence where the villain falls on the Hollywood sign, but blows up just the land part. It is an example that, are we going to lose the technique? Well, in time it would happen, but again, it just shows that, you know, nothing's ever given, because here I have to show you this where this shows that, you know, some things. And what's kind of funny was what's his name, Dennis Mirren, as I've mentioned, Dennis Mirren has said that I want to stretch my legs more. I want to give something more to the people in terms of what techniques I want to do. And you know, I mean, he's not wrong. You know, I mean, it's like you got to stretch your legs more. You got to do more things for what you want to create in terms of doing visual effects. And it's coincidentally, I mentioned Surai before, and he was one of the many people who was not too afraid of doing um, using new techniques to create certain aspects of visual effects. You know, I mean, because you got to remember, you know, the effects of the day back, or I should say, the effects of the golden age, you know, in its infancy, was glass paintings. You know, pretty much, you know, stop motion motion sequences, you know, miniature landscapes. I mean, you have those techniques, but it's like, and then you had suitmation too. I should say that, but those had their limits. And as much as we want to see um, that happen, you know, we got to say, "Oh yes, what's up, Gojira? Gojira, thank you. Yes, I got the Jedi mind trick power, brother. Thank you." Thank you, pretty much. Very good. I hope you're doing okay, brother. but you know what I'm saying, though. Techniques, you know, whatever you was using before, you got to use more. You got to change with the times. And these guys, you know, ILM were doing that. They were doing you know, they had to change up with things. They have to change up with aspects and techniques, you know. And some people would say that, you know, computers was going to be, you know, the death of, you know, what was brought behind, which was motion control, miniature photography, you know, and all these things. I mean, to a point, it kind of would, but that's only because some people thought that digital effects were pretty much the death of all things, but it goes without saying, we can't always say that what will or won't. And it's just, you got to let things work in their own spaces, and whatever people feel like this will, linger on and last, it will. But if it doesn't, that's okay. That's just how things work. Things work like that. And oh wow. Hey, what's up, entertainment? What's up, Kevin? Yes, my brother. How you feeling today? Hopefully you're doing fine, my brother. Hope you're feeling very well today. Yes, thank you for the comments. I appreciate that. Yes, but you get what I'm saying though. And the one movie that would really capitalize on that with the changing of the times, passing of the baton and techniques that really shattered it forever. You would think it would be Terminator 2. It would be another little film that was directed by Mr. Let's see here. Hold up. Wait a minute. See the magic. Well, look, it is look. I am talking about a studio that has the magic, and yes, I thank you for that. Yes, yes. But no, you get what I'm saying though. But no, a film that was directed by Steven Spielberg was a little film that was based on a Michael Crichton film. I mean, Michael Crichton film. Although Michael Crichton was a director himself, a little book that he made, and it was a film or a book called Jurassic Park, and it involved the pretty much the existence of 20th century dinosaurs. So they figured, like, how's this going to work? How are we going to do this? And they started out with one of the alumni of ILM, which was Phil Tippett. He started doing a lot of test runs of dinosaurs for the film. But as it turns out, it was okay because of the technique. But Dennis Mirren said to himself, I'm going to try something. I'm going to see if I can do something that's going to be a little different. Let's see if it's going to. And he did this little, trick. When I say trick, he did this little test where it shows that no, it wasn't that. It was a Gallimimus sequence just in bone form, and it was very fluid. So they decided to say, well, let's take a Tyrannosaurus and see how it looks. And the screen testing for that, when they watched it, the people who was making, it's like, I got a feeling we might be going this direction. So, as it turns out, the work that Phil Tippett had done, you think that, well, his work is pretty much dead. It's gone. It's dead in the water. It's not going to, work or anything like that. But as it turns out, he was a staple in the making of the film, and his credit was to what it is. So from stop motion to fluid computer graphic dinosaurs, this would hone in to saying that, okay, times are a changing, and we got to change with it. And yes, yeah, yeah. You know what? That's a good point, Gojira. That's that. See. This is the thing about computer graphics, and I feel that there's something that's lost on some people. What they don't realize is that this was, as I say, computer graphics at this time was still a kind of shoddy example of doing effects, but with a lot of computer programming and a lot of computer power, because this was at a time when ILM had hired new software, new computer drives, everything to really get the speed of doing effects, especially digital effects, up and running to make these effects work and make more realistic. Because you got to remember, the computer graphics at that time were still kind of kind of shoddy. But when you look at, as Gojira mentioned, you take the technique of no one seeing water spray and all that, especially on, like I say, living flesh, which is a dinosaur, and see it wet and it's burning and all that. That is not easy to do because water was still a, you know, element that was kind of hard to do in computer graphics, but they managed to pull it off. And like I say, Jurassic Park would change all that forever. It would just decimate it, you know. And from then on, other studios would become, not so much feverish, but they realized like this is the technique. We're gonna see if we can hone in and use these things, you know. And this is where I have to come in and play on devil's advocate with this in terms of when I say that. I mean, this is where other people started to create other visual effects studios. And you got to remember now, I mean, it wasn't because they were trying to be competition, but they were trying to do is what George Lucas did, which was create a studio which would hone in and do the effects for our stuff, you know. And one of them was James Cameron, as I mentioned before. He would create, along with some other people, create Digital Domain, which would be the first studio. When I say first studio, first will be the studio which would do the effects for his film True Lies. And we, like I say, and it came out the same year that Forrest Gump and The Mask, which was two films that were done by ILM also. And you know, it's like, yeah, this is the thing. ILM would contribute into inspiring other people to create, you know, special effects studios, because like I say, what was started back in the in the middle 70s, you know, you had nothing. But now we're generating much more studios that will generate something that would happen to give of these other film studios or pretty like directors, writers, something to say, let's make these things come to light. And like I say, ILM was the forerunner. They were pretty much the ones that were just giving, you know, making and doing a lot of the effects that we see up to this point. And like I say, a lot of the effects were no different than what the other effects were being done at this time. I mean, here, I had this right here is a miniature setup of a sequence from the first Mission Impossible film, and coincidentally, the recent Mission Impossible film incorporated effects done by ILM. You know, they had only done like maybe 4 or 5 of the effects in the series, but seeing this being the last, and now that I think about it, let's see, that's Dead Reckoning, Final Reckoning, Ghost Protocol, um, and the first, and this one here, I think it might be 4, maybe not 5. No. Yeah, it's 5 because Mission Impossible 3 was, yeah, that's right. You used special effects. That's right. But no, getting back to what I'm saying is, you know, they were doing their best. They were doing everything. They were doing a lot of stuff. You know, they were doing mini films, and like I say, other studios were doing also. And like I say, this was the '90s. You know, I mean, there was a lot of, you know, effects studios that were coming out the woodworks. I mean, one in particular created by Peter Jackson, and I'm pretty sure anyone who's a geekhead like me, who knows what I'm talking about, that would be Weta Digital and Weta Workshop, which eventually create the effects for the brilliant Lord of the Rings trilogy. Which I say, look, it's it just shows you how ILM has such an influence on so many people, and Peter Jackson was no exception. And if you hear a lot of rain right now, it's storming outside, so I apologize for that. But it's not going to stop me from doing what I'm doing right now. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, the '90s was fluish with stuff that ILM was doing. I mean, here's another example. This is the ship from Galaxy Quest, which is another brilliant film. And this is the most controlled. This is one of the ships in a ship, well, a model ships in the film. This is the 8-foot version of the ship that Tim Robbins, not Tim Robbins, it's Tim. Wait a minute, not Tim. No, his name is Tim in the show. Tim Allen. Tim Allen. Tim Allen. Sorry, Tim Allen. Oh my God. Oh my God, dude. I'm so bad. I suck at this. Um, but no, but like I say, the '90s was rolling. Other studios were coming out, special effects studios like Frame Store, you know, MPC, Double Negative was another one. Double Negative was one of those studios that eventually would come out. Yes, yes. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. I do. I'm having a brain fart like you wouldn't know, and that's sad, man. That's like I should know this. I'm supposed to be a geek, but it's like you don't know who you're talking about. It's like, and I said Tim Robbins, like no, not Tim Robbins. What the am I talking about? But yeah, but thank you though. Thank you though. Thank you, Gojira. Oh my God, no. Thank you, God. Thank you, guys, and thank you guys for helping me out and keep me on my toes and everything. But no. The simple fact is that different effect studios were coming out, and like I say, and like I mentioned, Double Negative was one of those studios which would contribute to many of Christopher Nolan's films. Like Interstellar, the Batman trilogy of his, and yes, that's thank you very much. Yes, that's like I say, we got to have each other's back, brother. Thank you. But no, but that being said, though, it's a lot of the studios were not just that; it was other studios to say we had the brain power to say let's create our own stuff. I mean, because as I say, it was without saying that ILM was influencing other people to create stuff themselves, and it was just just how it was. And here, dude, I mean this is top tier stuff, and this is the stuff that you want to see, being brought. And like I say, they were home. They were like I say, they were brilliant in doing a lot of miniature work. ILM was, but unfortunately, like so many things, eventually they would, you know, hey, brother, like I say, at least you had a little fun for now. But hey, you can always rewatch this when you get home. That's what, because that's what I say. This is live, but it's on repeat, so you can repeat it all. Like you say, watch it, and watch it again. Watch it one more time. You know what I mean? Yeah, but thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Yeah, you just be safe too, though, bro. All right, but no, you get what I'm saying, though. I mean, the simple fact is that was something that ILM was very amazing at, which was a lot of miniature effects, a lot of you know, pyrotechnics and all that stuff. But unfortunately, as I said before, the technique wasn't so much getting old; it was just like something else was coming in. But as Gojira mentions, though, the blend of practical and digital is something that I feel like is coming almost lost now. someone like Christopher Nolan is probably one of the few, and even Michael Bay, who would contribute to. In fact, speaking of Michael Bay, here's a moment right here with Michael Bay examining one of the planes that was used on the bombing of Tokyo sequence in Pearl Harbor. This was his first contribution. I mean, contribution with ILM, and next to him is special supervisor Eric Breffick, who supervised the effects for Pearl Harbor, and next to him is one of the co-supervisors, Ed Hirsch. You know, and this guy here to the far right, that's Greg. I mean, Greg Heron. Yes, Greg Heron. Greg. No, it's Jeff Heron. I'm sorry, Jeff Heron. He was the pyrotechnician on the film, and like I say, the plane that you see that they're using in this sequence, what they examine it is using a later sequence in Pearl Harbor, where the plane crashes into a field, and that was all miniature, you know. But that's the thing about it. Digital effects would help erase a lot of things to help, give the effect of certain things more gravitas and more freedom. So it's like, okay, we can see that, a lot of these films are going to be, keep the blend of miniature, and miniature is going to be around for forever. But, like anything, it's not going to happen. I mean, some things just aren't meant to last. I mean, because lately that's not the case with, with some studios. It's pretty much pro digital and everything. And just another example right here, this film here, or this particular moment here, this is the space shuttle in, Dateless, that was used in Clint Eastwood's film Space Cowboys, which I have to say is a very good film, but it was one of those films where it was pretty much one of the last of the so-called. It still had digital effects, but it was showing that eventually, and the miniature photography in there was brilliant, But it was these things that would contribute to knowing that in time, digital, the computer would be the number one thing to do effects. Which I gotta say for myself, I was gonna be kind of sad about that, but I realized, like anything, we have to change with the times, and we have to do with what is provided with us in terms of when people want change. Because films like that would come out the box running with that would be like the Pirate of the Caribbean films during the 2000s. And if you see the digital effects in that film, you realize it's a special blend of digital and, model work and photography and physical effects, but and you think like, okay, I mean, this should last forever, I mean, this should last forever, but again, ILM, like anything else, was a state. I put it like this: it's a victim of its own, success. The success was more than they ever thought it would be, and like I say, they contribute to the special effects for the prequels of the Star Wars prequels, and even though George Lucas loved, using miniatures, and the funny thing is, the miniature work that was done in both Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, they all were, had the most visual or model photography in them, more than any of the films that the previous three original trilogy films had. If you add up all the model work done in those past films, actually, the Phantom Menace had more effects work miniature wise than all those three combined. That's so crazy. That's why I say you seem like the miniature. I mean, the old techniques should contribute with the new techniques and not fade out. But the sad part about that is that these things would happen. And like I say, some things have to change. And I was kind of taken aback by that, with that happening, because the simple fact is, I didn't want that loss of that, amazing, you know, what was done before in my childhood to change now. But I realized as I got older, you just have to change with whatever's coming. I mean, that's just given. And even though that might seem sad, the truth is that sometimes you do have to change with it. And ILM was no different. They were changing with the times. And let's be honest, the effects they've given us to this day have contributed to a lot of amazing effects. They've done both the Twister films. They've actually contributed to the latest Alien franchise. Alien Romulus, which I have to say was probably it was, which I didn't think was going to be such a good film, was a damn good film. I have to say it was pretty good. I mean, it had its kinks in the road, but it did what it did. And then at the tail end of the 2000s, ILM would contribute to most of the visual effects work with the MCU. Okay, starting with the first Iron Man film. Iron Man was the first MCU film to use effects done by Industrial Light and Magic. And afterwards, a lot of the films that were coming out of the MCU, the Marvel Studios, ILM was, being used for those effects. They were being used for, you know, everything that's being done. And but before all this happened, between 2005 and 2006, this was a riff where I say things were changing. The model shop that was part of ILM, that was part of the main frame of, the staple of ILM, would be like a splitting of the atom, and the digital part would go this way, where the model shop of ILM would go this way, and it would contribute to becoming called Kenner Optical. And just a side note on what Kenner Optical is. That was the original name, or when I say original name, that was the name to keep people away from spying on the work that was actually ILM up in San Francisco, near San Francisco. So they decided to just take that and call the model shop of, or former ILM model shop, Kenner Optical. And that's what it would become. It was a separate entity where it would work on different films that were not ILM related in visual effects. They contribute to a film like Eagle Eye, or some other films that I'm trying to think off the top of my head that they contribute to, but that didn't need ILM to be contributed to, because at this point ILM was strictly a digital effects studio now. So, and like I say, after the teens got started, it was primarily just that. I mean, you did have you still had miniature effects being done by different, places, but they were that lucrative aspect was running out. When I say running out, it was becoming a dinosaur. In fact, when you go back to Jurassic Park, the line that Jeff Bridges' character says, and where a question is like, what do you think is going to happen to us? And he says, I think we just became extinct. Well, that's kind of what the miniature effects were going to be, kind of extinct. And like I said again, ILM was the victim of its own success with digital effects, and in time it would come to an end. It just would. It's just how things go. And it's nothing. It's not their fault that they were good at what they do, like some of the other studios, but it just shows that times have to change with whatever changes come. And like I say, eventually, the effects that they would contribute to digitally would be honed in to doing all most of the Transformer films. They would contribute to some of the DCEU films. They did Aquaman. They did that which I can say now coming up. The latest Superman film, they're going to be doing the latest effects for that film. I mean, they contribute to a lot of films that are out there. And recently, Sinners, which me and Kevin Lambert discussed, did a review on. There are effects in that film that were done by ILM. I mean, it's like I say, they're fluent in what they're doing in terms of visual effects. But like I say, whatever was done practically, as far as digital, I mean, practical and everything, something tangible. It's it's not so much that right there now. And I should mention that seeing as how Lucasfilm sold the rights to Disney, some of the stuff that they started doing with like shows like Indoor or the Mandalorian. What's incredible is that some people, even though it's a pretty much digital show, these shows were, somewhere along the line, someone contributed saying like, well, let's see if we can still build a small miniature to kind of see. Some of the people who used to build miniatures are now digital effects artists, but that doesn't mean that the technique of building miniatures is not still there. It still looms in the shadows. So it's not far gone. It's just that it's on the sideline. But to say that it will eventually just be dissipated, it will. I mean, and I can't say it's sad. I can't say, because I personally know I was sad that these things were going out of whack. They were going, but it taught me something though. It taught me that ILM has been the staple in doing effects for the better part of 5 decades. And here it is, its birthday, its 50th anniversary, and it's still holding strong to this day. And the fact that it's still holding strong to this day, and it still has future films that it has to do, like F1, which is a film directed by the guy who directed Top Gun Maverick. You can tell that it's contributing to a lot of films that are pretty much, in fact, while I'm here, let me just look up some of future films that it's got in the works. Well, yes, I mentioned Jurassic Park earlier, but also some of the films that they're going to be doing, like the Fantastic Four Final Steps, but also Jurassic World Rebirth, which will be coming out later. And they're actually working on a Tron film, which is Tron Ares, and also they're going to be contributing to a Predator film, which is Predator Badlands. And also they're working on the sequel to Wicked, which they did Wicked also, which is Wicked for Good. So, like I say, it's their hands are very bitty, very very bitty, very busy, and also their work on as far as employees has grown immensely. They've gone in from just a handful of people from 80 to almost not 800, but 3,000, nearly 4,000 employees. Because it's worldwide now. So, I mean, like I say, ILM is his huge conglomerate that has contributed to a lot of things and still goes strong to this day. And why do I love this studio so much? Why do I love this studio so much? I mean, why is that? I guess that's the question I have to ask myself. And the honest answer is, I truly don't know. I don't really know. Maybe because since I've always had a curiosity about how films are made, and ILM was just one of those entities back in the day that was, fresh and new. And I was watching, broadcasts behind the scenes of their stuff and how they did things. I guess that's the reason why, maybe that's the reason, and I don't know, I mean, because I see a lot of these these special effects studios now, and it's like, well, y'all just doing what the ILM was doing, you're just, doing what you're doing your own thing. And to be honest, some of these studios are out to a degree outshining ILM, but that doesn't mean ILM has not got its own thing going on that it can't do back what they can do, because they still be nominated for effects, which I should say, out of all the studios that have come and gone, I should mention that too. ILM has contributed to like 15 visual effects Academy Awards in its time. And mentioning about come and gone studio wise, some studios are no longer here. Some have started around the time where ILM started, or at least a few years later, like Apogee, Boss Films Corporation, um, DreamQuest Images. All these film studios, these special effects studios, are no longer here. They somehow, like Apogee, it finally ran out of gas in the late '90s. Same with Boss Film, which was created by Richard Edlund, who, he worked with ILM, but eventually, it finally, went bankrupt. And DreamQuest Images, it was doing great special effects. It worked on the aforementioned Abyss. It worked on Total Recall, and various other films. But eventually, it dried up, and it shows right there that maybe that's the reason why I love ILM, because it's got this. It's I guess their feet are just fully planted in the ground that it planted the seed, and it just has very strong roots. And that's probably why to this day, it's even 50 years later, it's still banging out hit after hit, contributing to whatever they contribute to, and it's like, wow. I just, it's amazing that it's still here, it's still, around, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. But the simple fact is that ILM is that is the goat of special effects studios, and it still is. And stuff like this, where uh, it's not, well, okay, it's not moving. What's going on? It's supposed to be a GIF, but I guess it's, well, this is just a shot. Oh, okay. Okay. Never mind. Never mind. It's let me hold on. Let me put it back on here. Let me put it back. Yeah, there you go. This is just a shot of, or behind the scenes of, War of the Worlds, from which was directed by Steven Spielberg. And let's just say that this is what you call great stuff that probably will never come again, which is miniature effects and digital effects contributing to, you know, what we see in the future. But no, in the end, though, this is the reason why I love ILM, and how they took the technique that they was given or had and expanded into something more than what they ever imagined. And I'm not saying this I'm not saying to be sad. I'm saying this to be kind of bittersweet, because it's actually makes me realize that if I hear the name ILM in a film, or I hear hear the word Industrial Light and Magic being said, they're going to be doing the effects for this particular film, I for once get giddy as a schoolboy and say, "Oh yes, they're doing the effects for this," And like I said, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this here. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular podcast, because I feel that some people, I mean, it's going to be, there's going to be many, things that are going to be mentioned, about certain studios, because there have been 3 books already written about ILM. In fact, there's a fourth one coming out in in early December of this year. So you realize they're uh, their contribution to the film and artists and everything. You see, it's still strong. It still has influences. It still has its power, and it's just like it's got better with time. Age like a fine wine. So all I know is that I'm just glad that I got a chance to make my own statement about this great studio and see that the studio here is still has a love for my heart, even after 50 years, and me being who's about to turn 55, next month. And you realize that this is a childhood thing to be. I wonder, and maybe that's why I never really grew up, in terms of what I love, and this is what's one of those things that I love, and I'm just glad that I got a chance to do this because it's so much fun. It's so much, gravitas. It's so much that I can say is reason why you should love to do what you love, you know. You should love what you like, and I like ILM. I love who they are. I love what they do. And like I say, whatever they contribute to next, hopefully, I'm just a fan of, and hopefully it enhances the story that we see on the big screen. So, but with that being said, we're going to contribute. We're going to continue. We're going to continue. We're going to continue on to our next episode of what we're going to do, or at least for me, future things that I have coming up. I will be contributing to Kevin Lambert's channel, Entertainment Headquarters, where we're going to be discussing the Bermuda Triangle. Well, not Bermuda Triangle, but Bermuda Depths, 1978 sci-fi, not sci-fi, well, sci-fi supernatural television film. And hopefully, I'm supposed to be contributing to Olvin's channel, where we're going to be discussing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, a very, very childhood classic that I love, But on my channel, I will be having future dates, and that'll be next month, starting with the first week of that month, where I will get with DJ Anubis, where we're going to be discussing female werewolves in in uh, in a certain lore, because female werewolves don't get enough cred as male werewolves, But we'll just be discussing that. And then, as I mentioned about Mission Impossible, we're going to be doing a breakdown of all the Mission Impossible films coming in a few weeks. With hopefully we'll have a good discussion with that. And like I say, I don't want to tell too much because I feel like just give you a little hors d'oeuvre of what we're going to have, what I'm going to be contributing to, and the rest I'll contribute to tell them about later on. But hey, that's the end of this discussion, and it's been a pretty good discussion. I didn't think it was going to be as long as it was, but you know what? I'm glad I did do this because this is what I love to do, and this is how I will want to always do this. So, with that being said, y'all take care. Happy Memorial Day too. Happy Memorial Day again. Y'all take care. Y'all be patient, and always keep the film legacy alive. Y'all have a good day.